This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Hey, I'm Rimona, currently an independent researcher. Last year I concluded my doctorate at the Transitional Justice Institute in Northern Ireland. My research looked at the tensions and trade-offs between justice and reconciliation in Israel and Palestine, zooming in on civic activism, documenting how at multiple levels justice and reconciliation often pull in opposite directions, although we kind of need them harmonized. The core contribution of my project was to document in great detail, both theoretically and empirically, this chasm between settler colonial studies and transitional justice and conflict transformation. More precisely, the tension between the very resilient settler colonial structure in place in Israel-Palestine and the diverse transitional transformative civic efforts trying to dismantle it, working in this non-transitional site presently. Over the past 14 years, my studies, research, and activism in different countries in Europe and beyond revolved around mainly conflict transformation, human rights, human security, corporate accountability, and interculturalism. I wouldn't say my interest particularly lies in feminist legal theory, but I have over the years felt intrigued by these uneasy intersections between race, class, gender, sexuality, age, disability, which do inform feminist legal theory. And probably this interest was sparked by my own personal and professional journey, sensing acutely the synergies and incongruences between the different spheres I inhabit, seeking to make sense of my multiple identities and how they shape my self-image, my rapport to others, and also my relation to knowledge production. The vulnerability theory has not so far directly informed my research, but that is why I decided to come here for a fellowship to learn more about it and explore ways of integrating it in my research, activism, and art. My doctoral project was inspired and continues to inspire my everyday encounters with vulnerability. And I have used the term vulnerability way before learning about vulnerability theory to describe what I felt was the inevitability of being injured following the word's Latin root, vulnerare, coupled to the capacity to resist or interpret it, hence the suffix ability. And for the past decade in my own life and the lives of those closest to me, I sensed repeatedly justice and reconciliation often pulling in different directions, but their ideal harmonization resting at the core of what we consider sane, normal. Justice, I feel, is often backward-looking and comes with a rigid, self-centered, often legalistic way of understanding truth and repair. Conversely, reconciliation is forward-looking and advances a more, let's say, fluid understanding of reality and prioritizes instead our interdependencies. So whether we think of macro settings or of micro ones, I believe the justice-reconciliation nexus kind of marks the rise and fall of our reports. And to me, this nexus has much to do with vulnerability and with vulnerability. As highlighted by vulnerability theory, vulnerability is constant and universal, but there are also important gradients in my site of focus. So in my research, this differential in vulnerability is evident. We witness the disproportionate vulnerability of Palestinians or the lack of resilience of Palestinians at this point in time and space. But there are also important feedback loops between the vulnerabilities of Israelis and Palestinians. And this universality of vulnerability, I feel, challenges the settler colonial paradigm. So one area of interest to me, which could be informed by vulnerability theory, is understanding how to disentangle this rigid, reductionist, settler, native, colonizer, colonized binary. Because given the history of this site and its cultural hybridity, the settler colonial paradigm appears to me both applicable and inapplicable. This, of course, questions standard accounts of race, indigeneity, and decolonization. So to bridge settler colonial studies to transitional justice, I feel an expansive, fluid understanding of identity, rights, and responsibilities may be needed in Israel and Palestine. And this is where a post-identity paradigm like vulnerability theory could serve from a transitional justice perspective. If I try to look critically at Israel-Palestine through a vulnerability lens, I see a lot of practical and ethical dilemmas around defining vulnerability and resilience, both individual and institutional. And this is what I'm currently trying to make sense of. I hope to not reduce complexity by finding answers, but to continuously expand it by developing new angles for asking questions. And vulnerability theory does that precisely. It helps me to ask new questions. As for translating expansive paradigms like vulnerability theory into policy, I see both a tendency for reductionist, segmented theory and activism, as well as a growing body of research and civic action seeking to widen and to integrate the different issues plaguing our societies. The challenge, I feel, is negotiating these trade-offs between what is pertinent analytically and what is effective practically. I believe my research on the justice-reconciliation nexus is relevant to both theory and praxis, and I've tracked over the years the continuities between the two in different contexts. The justice-reconciliation nexus is relevant to both macro conflicts like intergroup conflicts or international ones, as well as to micro ones, for instance clashes or unresolved wounds with our family, with our friends, partners, and collaborators. So my findings, I hope, contribute to a wide range of thorny aspects surrounding justice and reconciliation, not necessarily limited to Israel and Palestine. What I write is kind of the product of a dialogue between my academic background, my civic activism, my creative work, and just my everyday intimate dilemmas. So it could be of interest to scholars, to practitioners, to artists, and to lay people.
What do you hope to take away from your time as a visiting scholar at Emory?
Let me share with you some goals I had in mind when I came here. So first, through independent study and through dialogues with scholars at the Vulnerability Initiative, I've been mapping some intersections between my work and your initiative's approach to develop an article on how vulnerability theory could help me reinterpret the justice-reconciliation nexus in Israel and Palestine. Because this year I'm mainly concerned with segmenting my doctoral research into a few hopefully publishable papers. Second, I'm hoping to conduct several interviews with scholars here on how vulnerability and the justice-reconciliation nexus intersect. And this would coalesce your initiative's message with the expertise of your fellows and my own background in dilemmas on the justice-reconciliation nexus. Third, I've also been contemplating setting up a small multimedia exhibition of some of my pieces dealing with vulnerability, such as poems, flash fiction, collage, drawings, and photos. On some of these fronts, I've advanced during my stay here. On many others, I shall continue working after I leave Atlanta next week. What I'll be taking away from my stay here, probably a more critical and sensitive grasp of what being human entails, a more nuanced understanding of interdependencies, an ethos to move beyond the outer layers when asking questions. I'll be taking with me the memory of the luminous minds and souls I crossed paths with here, and the green mantling Atlanta.